Your Next.js container crashed with OOM killed under 1,000 users, memory hit 512 MB in 5 minutes. The culprit: Next start loaded every dev dependency into production. The output, standalone option was introduced in Next.js 12.1. If you are using an older version, e.g. Next.js 10 or 11, this configuration is not available. For those versions, you must manually prune dependencies using npm prune production and copy only the necessary files, though the result is less efficient. Even with multi-stage builds, stray files can leak if not explicitly excluded. Add a Docker ignore file to prevent node modules, Git, and TypeScript source files from being copied into the build context, ensuring the builder stage only receives what's necessary. Next.js's server. JS does not handle SIGTERM gracefully by default. Without proper shutdown handling, in-flight requests are dropped during deployments or scaling events. Configure PM2's kill timeout and listen timeout as shown, and consider adding a custom signal handler in your server, JS, to drain connections. Let's break down self-hosting next. JS, Docker, Node.js, and deployment strategies, how it works, and the exact mistake behind that failure. Self-hosting Next.js means running the application on your own Docker, Kubernetes, or VPS. Unlike Vercel's managed platform, you handle everything: builds, memory, scaling, and monitoring. Next.js's default build is optimized for Vercel. For self-hosting, you must enable output. Standalone in Next. Config.js. This produces a minimal directory with only production dependencies, reducing module count from 4,217 to 847. Add output, standalone, to your Next. Config.js. This is non-negotiable for self-hosting. Without it, your Docker image will include every dev dependency. A multi-stage Docker build separates build time dependencies from runtime. Stage 1 installs everything and runs the build. Stage 2 copies only the standalone output, never running npm install again. This Dockerfile uses 2 stages. The builder installs all dependencies and builds. The runner copies only the standalone output, static assets, and public files. No npm install in the final stage. Node.js's V8 garbage collector doesn't know about container limits. Without explicit configuration, it thinks it has the host's memory, delaying GC until it's too late. Set max old space size equals 384 to keep the heap in check. Set node.options environment variable with the heap limit. For a 512 MB container, use 384 MB. This tells V8 to garbage collect more aggressively, preventing memory overshoot. A single Node.js process uses 1 CPU core. PM2 cluster mode forks a worker per core, utilizing all CPUs. With standalone output, each worker uses only 65 MB baseline, so 4 workers fit in 512 MB. This PM2 ecosystem file configures cluster mode with max instances. It also sets memory limits and graceful shutdown timeouts to prevent dropped requests during deployments. This is the same issue we highlighted at the start. Here's exactly why that happened. The Dockerfile copied the entire node modules, including dev dependencies. Next.js loaded 4,217 modules at startup, consuming 380 MB baseline. Under load, memory hit 512 MB, and the container was killed. Without output, standalone, Next.js loads all modules including dev dependencies, causing 1.8 GB image and 380 MB baseline memory. Enabling standalone mode produces a minimal deployment artifact. The fix: enable output. Standalone, restructure the Dockerfile with multi-stage builds and add the memory limit. The production image dropped from 1.8 GB to 210 MB, baseline memory from 380 MB to 65 MB, and the container stabilized under load. This single-stage Dockerfile copies everything, including dev dependencies. Without standalone output, the image is 1.8 GB and baseline memory is 380 MB. Under 1,000 concurrent users, the container OOMs. Without standalone output, Each PM2 worker uses 200 MB baseline. 4 workers consume 800 MB before handling any request, far exceeding a 512 MB container limit. If you forget to enable standalone output, your Docker image balloons to 1.8 GB and baseline memory hits 380 MB. This is the root cause of the OOM crash we saw earlier. If you run npm install in the final stage, you reinstall dev dependencies, defeating the purpose of standalone output. The final stage should only copy from the builder. Without the memory flag, V8 waits too long to collect garbage. The heap can grow to 450 MB before GC kicks in, exceeding the 512 MB container limit and causing an OOM kill. If you let Next.js serve static files, you waste CPU cycles that should go to SSR or API routes. Always offload static assets to a content delivery network or reverse proxy. If you use Next public for API URLs, they are inlined at build time. Promoting the same image to production will still point to staging. Use server-side env-vars instead. Offload static assets to a content delivery network with immutable caching headers. This reduces CPU usage on the Node.js server by 30% and improves dynamic response times because static requests don't queue behind dynamic ones. This Nginx configuration serves static assets with a 1-year immutable cache header. Dynamic requests are proxied to the Next.js server with no cache headers. This offloads static file serving from Node.js. Next public variables are inlined at build time. For environment-specific values like API URLs, use server-side processenv. This allows the same Docker image to be promoted across environments. Use process.env in API routes to read environment variables at runtime. This way, you can change the API URL by setting the environment variable without rebuilding the Docker image. Create a custom health endpoint that validates critical dependencies. Kubernetes uses this for readiness and liveness probes. The default Next health only checks if the process is running, not if it can serve traffic. This health endpoint checks memory usage, database connectivity, and uptime. It returns 200 only if all checks pass. Kubernetes will stop routing traffic to unhealthy pods. Replace console log with Pino for structured JSON logging. Always log to stdout so container runtimes can collect logs. Add request IDs in middleware for end-to-end tracing. This Pino setup outputs structured JSON in production and pretty prints in development. It includes environment and version in every log line for context. Use these commands to diagnose self-hosting issues. Check image size, count loaded modules, and monitor memory. Automate these checks in CI to catch regressions. Let's run through some common interview questions. Design a Docker deployment for 100K DAU. Multi-stage, standalone, PM2, content delivery network health checks. Why OOM at 1K users? No standalone, no memory limit, 4K modules loaded. Difference with without standalone? 1.8 GB versus 210 MB, 380 MB versus 65 MB baseline. And a few frequently asked questions. What does output? Standalone do? Produces minimal deployment artifact with only runtime files. How to reduce Docker image size? Multi-stage build with standalone output. What memory limit for 512 MB container? Set max old space size equals 384. Let's recap the key takeaways. Enable output. Standalone in Next, config.js. Use multi-stage Docker builds. Set node options equals max old space size equals 384. Use PM2 cluster mode with standalone. Ready to go deeper? Up next, open telemetry, monitoring, and observability in Next.js 16, then production checklist, security, performance, and CI/CD for Next.js, then security in Next.js 16, CSB, taint API and server actions security, and bundle analysis and performance optimization in Next.js 16. Find them all at TheCodeForge.io. Thanks for watching. The full article and code examples are covered in detail at TheCodeForge.io.